much for having me. I'm glad that Melanie reached out to me back in the fall to speak. I just moved to Kentucky in July, and I was in Georgia before, and I'm sure there were some organizations around maybe Atlanta that provided similar services like this, but I'd never heard of one that recorded the people that had come talk and uploaded and things like that. And so I think that is an amazing feature of this, to be able to go back and look and see what other people have talked about. And if you can't make it one week, especially here in Kentucky, with there being such rural areas, it can definitely benefit to be able to get the word out better through YouTube and stuff. So about me, so I taught public school for 7 years, 1 year as a para, 1 year as a home-based service provider, and then 5 years as a classroom special education teacher. I'm a Board Certified Behavior Analyst. I got that back when I was teaching. Most recently I worked at the University of Georgia. They have a severe behavior and skill acquisition clinic that I was a supervisor in. What brought me to Kentucky was their doctoral program, and as well as my wife got a position there on faculty in the special ed department, so it worked out surprisingly well that a school I applied to and I got into in a position she wanted opened up there. So we, one in a million kind of thing. So that's my background on this. And a lot of times when people talk about challenging behavior, it's from the viewpoint of, I'm going to offer you strategies you're going to be able to take home and use and be ready to go with, or I'm selling you a product that this is going to help you. And I'm not selling a product, but saying that I'm going to give you strategies you're going to be able to go home and start using is overstepping my bounds in what we know. If we are training parents specifically to implement interventions and manage behavior, there are certain things that need to be, certain components of those trainings that we need to have to be effective. The most common ones are written directions or manuals, modeling of the procedures, opportunities to practice the skills, performance-based feedback is probably the most critical. And then in between those practice sessions, there's collaboration between the trainer and parent. In a setting like this, that is not very possible. We could do it in more of a workshop format, but not in the time limit we have. And even then, we have minimal research in seeing if parents are able to generalize the skills they learn to the home. So if you go to a clinic or someplace and you learn these skills, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but there just hasn't been the research focus yet to see, can parents go home and do that. And so there's a lot still that we need to learn to actually pass on kind of, we have effective strategies, we've had them for a while, but it's about getting them into the frontline practitioners and the parents' hands to be able to do those things. And so then what am I going to talk about? What has been shown in presentations like this is parents report decreased anxiety, decreased stress, and increased knowledge of the content that is presented. And so I'm hoping to provide some level of vocabulary. Oh, forgot to give this. This is just key terms I'm going to go over. You don't have to take notes, but it's just, you can just take one and pass it on. If you hear one of these words, just perk up or sit up, because I think it's an important term to know. As well as provide a history of how we used to treat challenging behavior, how it's treated now, ideally. And most importantly, I want to focus on the school's role. I know a lot of you said that you have children that have aged out of school. Everything else will apply to it, or if they're getting services from a private service provider, then they should still follow this same current treatment process, and the terms should still be relevant. And lastly, I will go over some general strategies for home. They're very broad, they're not specific. They're more preventative procedures for managing challenging behavior. And there will be time for questions. And so I was curious who I was going to be talking to. So it sounds like there's a diverse group here of parents, grandparents, teachers, advocates, with a range of children they're representing here. First thing with challenging behavior is I think to recognize that it affects every family differently. It's different in every school. It affects every community different. It affects peers differently. And it's very much based on the cultural norms there in that community or society. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about things, or when you're not here and you're hearing other families talking about behaviors they're dealing with, because there's so many factors that go into it other than just what that behavior is, in terms of the support level at home, the support level in school, and many, many other factors. So the first thing with challenging behavior is just what it looks like. The form is often what it's called. And tantruming, yelling, property destruction, aggression, self-injurious behavior, non-compliance, tons of different labels we apply to it. That being said, that doesn't really tell us what that looks like. Aggression could be hitting, could be kicking, could be biting. Furthermore, it could be an open hand hit or just a closed hand hit. So there's a lot of things that you have to get very specific on when you're looking at challenging behavior and really narrowing down what are we talking about. And so with that, decades ago, and maybe sometimes still currently, challenging behavior was dealt with based on the form. Based on if you hit, you go to timeout. These were reactive strategies that were used, in that the behavior would have to happen for the intervention to take place. You hit, then you go to timeout. You do this, then this happens. We would call that punishment-based, in that we're either adding something to the environment or taking it away after the behavior occurs to make that behavior decrease. Sorry for that terminology there. But with punishment, it is effective. We have decades of research showing that punishment works. And there are situations where it is used and should be used. Of course, those decisions are made by a team, and they're very data-driven, or they should be. But there are ethical considerations to it. And because sometimes it can be used at the wrong times or used incorrectly. And an example of that is with some individuals who may have intellectual disability. If we're using punishment, we want to be able to explain to them what that contingency is, what is going to happen if this happens. And it can be difficult to know if the student or individual understands that contingency. Yes, we can tell it to them, yes, we can present pictures, but it is difficult to make sure they have acquired that. And if you think about it, if we're driving on the road and a police officer pulls us over for speeding, we knew what the rule was. I shouldn't have been going 80 and a 65, I got a ticket. And if they didn't post speed limit signs anywhere and you never knew what the speed limit was and you got pulled over and got a ticket, you'd be like, this is pretty unfair, I have no idea what's going on. That's kind of how it would apply into ethical considerations for students. If they don't know what they're getting punished for, that being said, research shows that even if they don't know what they're getting punished for, it's still effective, but there's that ethical consideration there. As well as difficulty maintaining the effects of punishment. So yes, it's effective, but we don't just want it to be effective in that one research study. Is it effective when we remove researcher support? And that's one of the difficult things with punishment, in that if you think about roads you're driving on in northern Kentucky or eastern Kentucky, where there's no cops on this little road here, you're going to fly down and it's fun to drive on, all that good stuff. You're not going to abide by the speed limit there. Same thing with challenging behavior. If the person if mom or dad or grandma or grandpa, whoever implements that punishment, if they're not there, chances are that challenging behavior is going to keep occurring. One of the more interesting things that we've kind of looked at recently with punishment is that if you implement a punishment procedure and it's not effective initially, we don't have research to support that increasing the level of punishment will be effective. That's really interesting, in that, say you're doing a 2-minute timeout and 2 weeks go by, this is just not working, and you think, let's up it to 5 minutes. We don't have research showing that's effective. I'm not saying it wouldn't be, I'm just saying that there is no research to support it, and that's really important for any decisions made in schools, because they have to use research-based interventions and practices. I think that's really interesting. And then we have the form. So what the behavior looks like, we just talked about. We also have the function of the behavior. And with function, we're essentially looking at why is the behavior occurring. And we typically break it down into 4 or 5 categories of why is it happening. Is that behavior occurring to access tangibles? That would be toys, edibles, iPads, computer games, or for sometimes with individuals with autism, it could be perceptive interests. As well as attention would be another function. That could be attention from a parent, attention from classmates, attention from the teacher. It could be positive attention. Nice job, man, I appreciate that. Or negative attention. No, you need to stop that right now. We don't do that. It could be something as little as eye gaze. All those are forms of attention that can be the cause of a challenging behavior. Another function would be escape, getting out of schoolwork, getting out of demands at home, as well as getting out of pain. If you're sitting too long, your legs are going to start to feel kind of fall asleep on. You're going to need to stand up and walk around. And sometimes if a student needs to do that, we may be like, hey, what are you doing? Get back in your seat. But if it's just their legs are getting tired, it's like, okay, they're just trying to escape that pain, that discomfort. Another function would be automatic. And what we mean by that is something that's not socially mediated. So that would be, think about, when we rub our eyes. We're not trying to do it for anything in the environment. We're just doing it for something internal. If you feel a headache coming on, you may take some Advil or something like that to escape. It's kind of tied in there, but we're trying to get away from that headache. Scratching your head, things like that. And multiply maintain is just any combination of those things. You may be engaging in a behavior to access both tangibles and attention. And that's when it gets tricky. So I've got a video here, and I want us just to be looking at the potential functions that the challenging behavior could serve. So we're going to be looking at aggression, and you will know it when you see it with this in this video. It's where it's verbal task refusal, so saying no or indicating a verbal indication that the top child's not going to follow through with the task given, or elopement. And elopement is a fancy way of saying leaving the designated area. So getting up. It could be if you're at a group lesson and you just get up and walk off. That could be elopement. If you're supposed to be doing seat work at your desk and you get up, that could be elopement. It could also be running out into the street. That could be elopement. So you don't need to write anything down or anything like that, but just keep in mind those potential functions of attention, tangible, escape, automatic, and then something multiply maintained.
Tonight, Super Nanny meets the Bruno family.
Let me switch this to my phone internet. That might be a little bit faster. Okay, let's try this again.
Tonight, Super Nanny meets the Bruno family.
Nice to meet you, I'm Joe.
With 2 teenagers.
Hi. Whatever.
And 2 little terrors. These parents have their hands full. And are fed up. Mum needs time for Mariah's therapy.
This is what I'm not done with Mariah right now.
But Bella and Sam demand her attention.
Dad.
Can Super Nanny help Mum and Dad gain some respect?
This little girl is trying to rule roost. Are you putting up with that? Are you?
Isabella is very strong-willed. Pick up my spoon! No. It's not in there! When Bella gets in one of her moods, I want it! Bella, stop it, please. No! It takes so much out of me physically and emotionally. Get up. You're swinging that around, and I don't want you playing with this.
Mum had barely finished doing therapy with Mariah.
Okay, so starting
when
here.
Bella, the 7-year-old, started swinging her bat around the area where they were working.
Stop. No. Don't make me chase you. Isabella, she just really is, very headstrong and wants her way. Get in your chair.
What's the chair?
I hear her sit over there. Get in there and sit there. Don't move. Don't move. I'm sitting this time.
Naughty chair.
We end up sitting here all afternoon. Sit. Give me this. Give me this. No, you don't swing. Okay, that's it. You don't swing. I get said enough to swing it. You know what? You need to go upstairs. No. No.
Uh-oh. Bella was resisting, and I could see that Mum was really starting to get worked up.
Stay in here. We're gonna behave when you come up. Why aren't you sharing with your things today? Stop it! You're done.
All right. So, with that, we're looking to see what's happening after that behavior is occurring. When the child engages in aggression, verbal task refusal, or elopement, what is she accessing? Yeah, I would say attention is what's going on there too, and escape as well. So some form of attention and escape is what I would kind of label that as.
And that's very contradictory, because how can you get attention if you're trying to escape at the same time?
It's tough to parse those out from, if a child's engaging in challenging behavior, especially if someone's in danger, you can't not provide attention to some level. And so it's real hard to parse that out and be able to kind of identify what's the function. We're going to get into that in just a second. Okay, so the current way of managing challenging behavior is based on the function. Again, why is that behavior occurring? Trying to use more preventative strategies that are reinforcement based. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as positive behavior supports. And with that, we're trying to teach a socially appropriate replacement behavior that accesses the same function as the target challenging behavior. So, for example, if for challenging behavior, the child pushes silverware off of the table, property disruption. The parent says, we don't do that, silverware stays on the table, child accesses attention. If that keeps happening, we think, okay, this kid's getting attention every time he or she swipes that table. So we want to teach a behavior that can still access attention. So one of the most common things to do is teach a child some form of requesting. Child asks parent for tickles, parent says, I'm going to get you, tickles the child, they access attention. So that's what we're trying to do instead. It's that easy, everyone can go home. So challenging behavior, that some form of property disruption, function was attention. The replacement behavior was requesting, the function was attention. The challenging behavior and the replacement behavior access the same function. And with requesting, a lot of times you may see it called functional communication training. What that means is we're teaching a socially appropriate form of requesting so the child can access any one of those functions. And with requesting or communication in general, it can be vocal, sign, eye gaze, gesture, picture exchange, voice communication output aid, number of many different forms, and as technology advances, we're having many more ways to help individuals communicate. But we got to make sure we have the right function. Otherwise, we're going to keep seeing that challenging behavior, whatever it may be. So, if a child is engaging in self-injurious behavior, and what keeps happening is the parent gives the child chips and tries to talk to her to calm her down. We may think, all right, the child's getting chips, getting tangible out of that. So we teach the child to, well, in reality, I'm backtracking here. So in reality, we need to recognize that if this keeps happening, that it's most likely tangible and attention that the child's accessing. There's two things the child will be accessing. So if we teach the child to communicate to access chips, that's fantastic. You're going to have a happy kid getting those chips without engaging in self-injurious behavior. However, when the child wants attention, if we don't teach them a replacement behavior for accessing attention, we're still going to have the self-injurious behavior, so it's going to keep occurring. So then, it's very important that we know what the function of a challenging behavior is. So how do we do that? So we have this great thing called a functional behavior assessment. And this is how we determine what is maintaining a challenging behavior. It's comprised of interviews, observation, and a functional analysis. And I'm going to go over each one of these things. And then I'm going to tie into how this relates to schools. So with an FBA interview, someone is interviewing people who are around the behavior and know the child, or individual, I should say. And some typical questions are, what seems to trigger the behavior? How do you react or respond when the behavior occurs? What do you think the child's trying to communicate? Where does the behavior typically occur? Where does the behavior typically not occur? And so those are simple questions there. You can get a lot of great information from that, but again, it's very hard to pinpoint the function or multiple functions just from an interview. So typically I actually don't know of any effective FBA that was just an interview. So that's usually the first component of a functional behavior assessment though. Next is usually goes to some form of observation. And so with an observation, people are looking to see what happens just before the behavior happens, what's, the behavior happens, then what happens after it. And they call it ABCs, antecedent behavior consequence. And consequence just means what happens after the behavior occurs. And what that gives you is you're able to kind of see what function that behavior is accessing. And this can be really good, but at the same time, if you see that there's all sorts of different variables changing and the behavior is accessing all sorts of different stuff, it's really hard to make a decision about what the function is. So for one of these here, it says antecedent, teacher reading a book during large group, child pushes a peer, consequence, paraprofessional has child sit on her lap. So the child gets attention, but also kind of escapes that large group. It's tough to kind of parse out what is what here. Is it both those things? In another situation, the kid got access to tangible, another escape the task direction, or a task demand. And so, again, this provides a lot of good detail, especially about what's triggering the behavior, but again, it doesn't help us identify a replacement behavior that can access the same function.
I
Now-
have a question.
Yeah, please.
So if you have a child, your teacher is reading to the large group and the child pushes the peer, for instance. So then the professional takes the child and puts them on her lap. The next time that child is in that same situation, most of these children are so smart that they remember, oh, well, if I push another kid, I'm gonna be able to sit on the teacher's lap. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
So what would we do?
Exactly. So right now, we're trying to figure out why the child's doing that.
Okay,
Are they
I
doing it
apologize.
to just get attention and escape? Or if we're seeing the same behavior occurring in different settings, it may be that pushes serve a different function than hits, or could be a many number of things
Right.
like that. So we're trying to figure out why it's happening so that we can
Okay.
develop an intervention. Thank you for asking that.
Okay.
Okay. So then if we still aren't sure what the function is, we go to a functional analysis. And this is the gold standard for determining the function of a challenging behavior. It involves systematically and experimentally modifying the environment to try and increase and decrease that challenging behavior, so that we can change the environment. If we see an increase, based on how we change the environment, we know it's this. If we see a decrease, we know it's not this. Typically with this, it won't just be a teacher running it. It'll be some form of a behavior specialist. That could be a school psychologist or some type of Board Certified Behavior Analyst with functional analysis experience. It shouldn't. There's a lot of people out there who have great titles, who are experts in a number of things, but that doesn't mean they have expertise in running functional analyses, especially when you're dealing with, or when you're trying to manage and treat behaviors that are of high severity, high rates. You don't want people getting hurt. You don't want the child or the individual hurting themselves, or at least for as short a period of time as possible to run that. And I'm not going to go into what this looks like, but you've seen the term. You know, if the other two, if you've done an interview, you've done observations, and you're still just not sure, then you may need to go to something like this, and a school system will talk about how they would do that. So, you've done this assessment, you've identified your function, then we can come up with the behavior intervention plan, often called a BIP. And with this, you're going to have preventative strategies and reactive strategies, both things for managing the behavior. So preventative strategies, that's teaching that socially appropriate replacement behavior. So we're going to find a behavior that's socially appropriate that can access the same function. So if the kid wants to access attention, we may teach them to request for attention. I need a hug. Sure thing, bud. They get a hug. Also, it'd be great if it was that easy, but we have to have a way a lot of times to teach kids how to engage in these behaviors. And there's set procedures we can use, most of which were developed here at the University of Kentucky on instructional strategies for teaching skills to individuals with autism and related disabilities. And then environmental modifications, and I'll go into some of those later. when we covered general parenting or general strategies that can be taken home. Reactive strategies, so what do we do if the behavior occurs? And this is going to vary based on the function of the behavior, the resources available, the safety of the child and other individuals close by. Sometimes it may just be, if it's to access attention, it may just be, let's just ignore the behavior if it occurs. We're going to be trying to teach them an appropriate way to do it, but if it happens to occur, you know, if they're saying inappropriate vocalizations, cuss words, sexual things, anything like that, it might just be, let's just ignore it and not let it access attention. If it's aggression, it may be block the behavior. If it's aggression maintained by attention, it may be block the behavior but provide as minimal amount of attention as possible. Easier said than done. But we're not talking so much about punishment right now. When doing an FBA, typically punishment is not the first go-to with it. And so I'm going to read this whole statement here. Punishment procedures should only be implemented if there is immediate concern for the safety of the individuals in a classroom. Otherwise, previously mentioned preventative and reactive procedures should be implemented first, and their effectiveness should be documented across multiple days. After data are collected, the IEP team may IEP is Individualized Education Plan. Team may discuss other options, including punishment procedures. And if punishment is determined to be needed to increase the likelihood that problem behaviors will decrease, the IEP team needs to ensure that socially appropriate alternative behaviors are being taught, and that the least aversive form of punishment that can still be effective is selected. So with all that, 99% of the time, reinforcement-based approaches are going to be, should be tried first. So the school's role in all of this. Covered a whole bunch of stuff. Let's try and put it in some context. So in 1997, there was the amendments to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. One of the biggest provisions that came out of that was that students who engage in behaviors that interfere with their learning or the learning of their peers, the IEP team needs to consider strategies, positive behavior interventions, and supports to address that behavior. So the key words there is positive behavior interventions. And the behaviors we're talking about are things that we've been talking about: non-compliance, verbal and physical abuse, property destruction, aggression, behaviors that distract from learning in general. And failure to provide positive behavior supports would constitute a denial of free, appropriate public education. So schools are kind of put on point now that they need to be using reinforcement-based approaches, but not only that, they need to be identifying the function of the challenging behavior. So, sorry, I jumped ahead. Schools are required by law to treat challenging behavior and include that in the student's IEP. If there's an FBA developed, a BIP developed, those will be in the student's IEP. If that student leaves that school and goes somewhere else, those documents stay with the student, but other schools should be responsible for implementing those procedures. Function should be addressed with supporting data from interviews, observations, and a functional analysis if necessary. Again, if they've done interviews, that should rarely be enough. There may be some instances, but if it's that easy, I don't know if they would go as far as to implement an FBA. There may be some cases. I just don't have personal experience with that. Typically interviews and observations. Then if it needs to be a functional analysis, they should either have a behavior support personnel on staff in the county, or they should bring in someone to be able to set that up and run it. UK there are people there who are working in schools doing that, so there's services there for it if the schools don't feel that they have the capacity to do it themselves. And targeting preventative strategies such as teaching socially appropriate replacement behaviors. And when teaching those behaviors, those replacement behaviors, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 2004 mandated that teachers use research-based intervention, curriculum, and practices. So, a lot of stuff there that schools need to be doing. And in my experience, I hope they are doing them. In my experience, I felt like we did do them. But There are going to be times when there's so many other things going on, either in the teacher's life or the administration's life, or the behavior support people's lives, that you might be taking the path of least resistance. But y'all hopefully being the advocates you can be, can kind of say, I think we may need to push this further and do some more direct observations. What about a functional analysis? We don't really have a clear function here for this. I'm not sure why it's occurring. What do the data say? Always going back to the data to support any decisions being made. The data should support the FBA, the functional behavior assessment, the behavior intervention plan, and any changes thereafter. So there will be times when you do an interview, you observe, you get a functional analysis, you think you have the function, you implement your intervention, and you are wrong. That behavior keeps occurring, or it gets worse, and you do the intervention for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. If you don't have data to say it hasn't changed, then you don't know if you've been effective or if it's gotten worse. You can't say anything to that. So it's so important to look back at the data and make decisions based on that. And so some take-home strategies then from all this. Functional communication, stressing that at IEP meetings is so critical. And it's especially important across the nation as alternative assessments grow in popularity, and alternative assessments are each state does it differently, but it's a form of assessment that covers general education academic content for students with moderate to severe disabilities. And so there are definitely students who benefit from that, who, 20 years ago, we were not pushing them as hard as we should have been. We did not have the expectations that we should have had for them. At the same time, so right now I am a supervisor at University of Kentucky doing supervisions of student teachers in special education classrooms, working with individuals with moderate to severe disabilities. It destroys me to go into a classroom to observe a student teacher, and they're working with a child, or sometimes even a teenager or adolescent, young adult, or adult actually, and that individual does not have a form of functional communication outside of being able to say, I want chips or something like that, and they're working on receptively identifying coins. And because, well, that's the student's going to be tested on it, the teacher's going to get evaluated on how the student does on the alternative assessment, and so there's this weird catch-22 we're in of how do we appropriately, or how do we honor the student's IEP, which should be their curriculum, but also at the same time teach what is mandated by the state. And we're still trying to figure that out, and I don't think anyone has a good solution to that. But I do think it helps if the parent or the advocate, whoever it is, really stresses the importance of functional communication at IEP meetings versus the IEP goals on receptively identifying coins, which for some students, yeah, they're going to be independently shopping and doing their own thing. That's great. But for others, it's not. And with communication, that doesn't just, a lot of times we have that I want phrase, and we get stuck on that. The kid gets it in elementary school, and they keep that all the way through high school, and it never expands. And you should not be satisfied with just saying, I want this, I want that. It should be expanded, and we should consider all functions of communication when doing that. So if a kid says, I want chips, they could just say chips, and that would mean the exact same thing as saying I want. So there's so many different actions we can teach, and pronouns we can teach, or just agents we can teach. So versus I want chips, it could be Collin, eat chips. They've told me who they're talking to, what they want to do with the item, and what item they want. So really making sure that when kids are getting communication intervention, targeting not just want as the only verb. There's tons of different verbs out there. Pick a handful, try and teach those, things that are meaningful to the child. As well as, the kids, okay, we know you want something, kid, but you're talking to a ton of different people. Teach them to request to certain people as well as peers and siblings and everyone, and go from there. Play skills they've been researched, but we've really seen a resurgence of them and a push for their importance in the past 6-7 years. And for older students, we may call those rec leisure skills, you know, listening to music on an iPad, browsing YouTube, all that good stuff. But including these in the IEP. And the reason we do that is because if a child has an appropriate independent play activity or rec leisure activity, chances are there's going to be less likelihood that they are engaging in challenging behavior. At the very beginning, I talked about procedures needed to effectively train parents specifically, and I kind of went over what those are. So after a behavior intervention plan is finalized and procedures are set, this is what we're going to do to decrease this challenging behavior and increase this replacement behavior. If you want to continue implementing those things at home, you're going to have training on it. You can't just get that document and be able to go home and implement it. Maybe some people can, but as a whole, we don't have the research to support that. And so you may need to ask for training to implement that at home if that's something you want. I don't mean to step on anyone's toes or make anyone mad with me about this next statement, but so sensory-based interventions right now, we do have studies showing that they have been effective at treating challenging behavior for children with disabilities. At the same time, we also have more studies showing that they're ineffective. So it's a tough situation right now with them. That study looked at 800 children with disabilities, 30-something studies. It was massive. And so it doesn't meet research-based standards or evidence-based practices for schools. However, it's tough with sensory-based interventions because I don't, off the top of my head, I can't think of any that are going to be harmful to the child per se, but if there are demonstrations of it being effective, it's a tough field to play in, but there is the other side that, well, it's taking away time from interventions that do have an evidence base. But as far as in the schools, it is done, but it's an interesting situation in that if schools are required to provide evidence-based practices and sensory-based interventions are not evidence-based, I just feel like that's a very dangerous situation for the school to be in.
Can you give an example of some sensory-based interventions?
Sure.
That might be employed to try to target, and then tell us what behaviors they might.
So a lot of times, people describe inattentiveness or elopement, so getting up from an area. A lot of things that people have tried are weighted vests have been used for a lot of different things, as well as different types of chairs or seats. I've seen a lot of seats that don't really have legs. They have like one peg and the student has to balance, but I don't know of research that's evaluated those. I do know of research about sitting on
Balls.
Yeah, like yoga ball kind of things like that. There's been some stuff with different type of lenses to see. There's been things with, I want to say audio, different types of headphones to drown out noise and things like that. And those would be targeting a range of behaviors. It could be aggression, property destruction.
So what happens when, like the person needs deep pressure because they have low muscle tone? And then they get restrained and held down, and that's reinforcing the behavior, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree.
Because they're getting deep pressure.
So if a challenging behavior is maintained by access to attention in the form of deep pressure,
Right.
Ideally we teach the kid an appropriate way to request for it. But if challenging behavior occurs and there is the health of someone is in danger, then there should be reactive procedures for those crisis situations, and sometimes it's about keeping everyone safe. And so even if that behavior gets reinforced, then that means there may need to be more focus on teaching that socially appropriate replacement behavior than just if you keep seeing that it keeps occurring.
But so in my opinion, what happened for 15 years of my granddaughter's life in school is over and over and over again, her whole school career was about restraints and held down to the floor. And that was like, to me, it never, you know, it would go on all the time. I mean, it was like that way all the time. And then, basically, because of that and the trauma that went with it, she comes to me as her grandmother, living with me, and then she's doing it to me. I'm her beating post. That's what happens. So, you know, how do you explain that? I mean, what happened?
Yeah, and
And she's 20 years old now, and what happened that it became that way?
and I'm
Just, no, I mean, it's okay.
yeah.
I'm just saying,
Okay.
do you ever see that?
Yes, a
A
lot more
lot?
often than we want to. There's
Right.
so many. I mean, a lot of this research is a lot newer now, and so
And then-
even once research gets out there, it's going to take 8 to 12 years to trickle down to schools.
And then where do you go from there? You know, when they're out of the school and they're using that person that's vulnerable, you know, the perpetrators are, you know, that held her down, because think about it, if you were held down by 6, 8 people, would you be traumatized? And then they take it out on somebody that's vulnerable, like a grandmother. So where does that person go? Where do you go for help for that?
So that research showing that there is not, that the sensory-based interventions do not reduce behaviors that they're trying to target is fairly recent, that 2015, there's not much before that.
So that was a large review of all the past
Okay.
research. So
Yeah.
someone was synthesizing all of it, because we did have demonstrations of it being effective, as well as
Okay.
demonstrations of it not being effective, and kind of this back and forth with, well, yes, well, no, well, yes, well, no. And then they synthesized it and kind of said, you're right, there's a lot of both, but it doesn't meet evidence-based standards for schools.
Okay. So it took basically the 2015 to synthesize it.
Yeah,
and
it was 30
get it
years
out.
worth of
Oh,
research.
wow.
Well,
Huh.
interesting.
And so with that, should stick with FBA procedures in terms of assessing the function of a behavior, and then trying to teach a replacement behavior for that. Before I talk about preventative strategies with environmental modifications that can be made, and in classrooms, one of the simplest things that can be done should be make sure the environment is engaging. And ways we can judge that is, does the child interact with available materials for how long? I'm sorry I keep saying child, I taught kindergarten for 1 year and pre-K for 4 years. So I have more experience with younger individuals in school settings. And for how long. And so some, especially students or individuals with autism who exhibit or who can exhibit restricted interests or perseverative interests, it can be tough to increase interaction with available materials. For a lot of my students, that was a goal. Again, getting back to play. And especially if things lose their interest fairly quickly, there may need to be some rotation system set up with preferred materials, and that rotation system would be based on how long the child engages with those materials. So, you know, after an hour, are materials kind of lame? After a day, after a week? Things like that to consider. And another important thing about engagement is it sets the occasion for communication and for learning. So I'm going to show you a video from a past study that we finished and that will be coming out here soon, but we had a non-responder in it. You were like, all right, this is definitely going to work, let's do this thing. So this is kind of a good example of what happens when an environment is not engaging. Student looks at item but does not initiate to it in any way. change the toys, trying to get the student to communicate in some way.
Hoping you caught it, May. Good job, Al.
Thanks for being choice, bud.
No luck.
Thank you.
So, sitting there, looking at the lights, spinning his hair for that time. And so it was, yeah, not an engaging environment for that little guy. And so, if there's no motivation, that's the biggest inhibitor to communication. But when the environment is engaging, you have the opportunity for teaching and learning. And so for this, so these are children with autism who did not have, who were not consistently using vocal communication. So we were targeting just one word requests from them, and so we'll cover that. So this is just baseline, there's no instruction, we're just kind of seeing how the child requests. I have a little toy plane that flies in the air. So he made the airplane noise that I had made before.
Yeah.
Reaches for items, so that's his way of communicating right now. Okay, so then we get to the intervention, and so with the airplane, we're targeting the action fly. With the Play-Doh, we're targeting the action make. And then after he says it, either independently or with prompting, I give him access to the item, and then I just expand it a little bit. So I'll say, make Play-Doh, or make numbers, because it has these number stencils. Or I'll say, fly plane. But he doesn't have to say that, it's just kind of exposing him to it. So he needed prompting to appropriately request. So that he said make there independently. So fly plane there, so 2 words. And so this is, I'm just saying, so if I'm not the instructor, if my pair is in there, what will happen? So she hadn't been instructed what to do. He needs to fly with her. So, before the child was reaching to access the item, and with me, yeah, sure, man, take it. I don't care. But with another peer, before you know it, you've got a brawl on your hands for the Play-Doh. And I'm not saying that after that, the kid would be able to go up to another peer and request. I'm not saying that at all. Actually, that's what we found out, is when we put peers in the same environment, we didn't see that. So we have to teach that, another thing. But when the environments are engaging, communication can occur, or we can teach appropriate communication. And once the more communication a child has, we've seen that the less challenging behavior there is. Before we get to questions, there are definitely some limitations to everything I said. So there are situations where you can ask for something and you just can't get it. Either it's not the time for it, or a pizza's cooking in the oven. Collin, eat pizza. You got 15 more minutes, man. We can't. I can't do anything about that. And so communication gets us a long way. But there are going to be other behaviors we're going to have to target that are a lot more difficult and that take a lot longer time based on research. Of course, it varies from individual to individual. But so the socially appropriate replacement behavior in that situation where we can't give access to what they're requesting is going to change. It may be waiting. It may be engaging in something else, choosing to engage in a different toy while the other one is getting cleaned or cooking or whatever it is like that. But when we're teaching a replacement behavior, it has to be something starting out the child can do without engaging in challenging behavior so that they can access that function, that reinforcement. So if we're like, oh, okay, we're going to teach them to wait 15 minutes. If you start at 15 minutes waiting, I don't know of a lot of anyone that can wait 15 minutes without engaging in some form of challenging behavior. And so we would start at lower intervals, much lower. We would look and see how long can the kid wait now. Sometimes, so the last client I worked with at the UGA clinic was this situation. And mom was like, we don't want communication. We just need waiting because at dinner, as soon as I get the food out and it's visible, the child's going at it, biting her hand, aggressing towards me. And she was like, I need something to do here. And I was like, okay. So we started at just 10-second intervals before she got access to tangibles. Now 10 seconds is not going to do anything, but that was the start. We got up to 30 seconds, trained mom and a sibling on procedures, and they took that home with them. But it took 150 trials. It took probably 4 to 5 hours at the clinic over 4 weeks to get that there. And so it is a long process a lot of times. But the great thing about schools is that, well, again, I know a lot of y'all have individuals that are not school-aged. But for those of you that do, the great thing about school is that students are there for 7.5, 8 hours a day. And that IEP dictates what they're learning. That it's not what they're doing in the first grade classroom. Now, if the student doesn't have an IEP, that's great. They don't need it. They're on that general ed curriculum. But if they do have an IEP, that dictates what they're learning. You should be able to look at that and know, this is what my student's learning today, not anything else. And so you know that they should be getting instruction on, if it's waiting they need, they should be getting instruction throughout that day. Not saying that it's going to be 7 hours devoted on waiting. That'd drive anyone insane. But it should be interspersed throughout the day. So with that, there are questions, comments, concerns, constructive feedback, funny anecdotes, or things that I did a horrible job explaining that I need to go over again. Yeah?
One thing we've had problems with is our son has difficulty associating cause and effect. And so he doesn't understand, for example, that if the two things are necessarily related. When he was little, like the timeouts, he wouldn't understand that the timeout was related or in response to some action that he did. We tried to point it out to him that the relationship, he wouldn't, it puzzled him, he couldn't do that. And things with other types of behaviors, he would do something that is unacceptable socially or unacceptable in some other ways, and wouldn't understand why he couldn't do that, or that it would have any effect on other people. How do you deal with, this seems like a lot based on understanding that sort of behavioristic connection.
Yeah, trying to teach the, so one of the most important things in teaching that relation of cause-effect is I want to say temporal, like the duration, the time between those two things. And there's people out there, very experimental stuff that says after 5 seconds, that effect can be gone for a lot of people. So it has to occur within 5 seconds of something happening to really begin to make an effect. And sometimes even 1 second is too much time that can go by. And so then with that, I'm don't know the specific situation, but just to point out other examples that I can think of, if a child or an student did something at school and then there was an effect put in place at home for that action, the very low likelihood that that's going to be effective in decreasing that challenging behavior. Now, if it is something to where as soon as that challenging behavior or that target behavior occurs, that effect should be there. And if it's like that and it keeps going and you don't see a change, then I would jump to the conclusion, again, you'd have to look at data and make a decision and make sure your procedures are consistent and where everyone who's implementing this procedure is doing it to a T. But if you're not seeing a change, then I would say that whatever that consequence is, whatever is following that behavior, is not serving its purpose. It's either not the function, it's not reinforcing that behavior or punishing that behavior. And that it's just, it may need to be changed somehow. But if
because sometimes our son would make wrong associations or incomplete associations where he would where we would point out that you can't write with ketchup on the table or something, but so you can have the mustard instead, or you would write on something. It was just an incomplete understanding of a generalization or.
That's, okay, and so kind of hints on the importance of making sure we do teach what should be done instead of that behavior. So I think, you know, not saying this is what you're doing or anything, just kind of saying based on what I'm hearing, it's important to say, okay, if we can't do this, what can we do? Right. So kind of like if we're driving and we don't know what the speed is and we get a ticket and we're not told what the speed limit is, it's kind of, I'm just going to guess again. Okay, can I do this? What am I able to do? I don't know. I'm not saying that anything I'm telling you now, I don't think this is not the kind of session where you're going to get that strategy that's going to help you go ahead. Hopefully there'll be some information.
Does this approach even work with that type of situation? It is very behavioristic.
Yeah, and so there are definitely, I think it does work with anyone, all organisms. Sorry, behavioristic point of view coming out here. But so you said your child has Asperger's, and so one thing we do know is that individuals who, we see that as IQ goes up, functional analyses, that one gold standard for determining a function, its effectiveness goes down. So that's an interesting thing too, and that it is more challenging with students who have higher IQs to be able to determine that function. Now, a lot of times it's great if they can just tell us, oh, I did it because of this. You're like, oh, great. But that's not always the case. So it is more difficult. But again, this is just like a 101 kind of thing over it. Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have like a, do this, you'll be good. That'd be awesome if I did. Man, I'd be charging for that.
We tried several approaches based on rewards and behavior modification and things that have always had very limited success because just he wasn't making connections.
And that can, I can only imagine, you know, how discouraging it can be then to sit through another one of these things. You're like, oh, okay, I've seen this before. Great, this again. The only thing that if the data is good and reliable and procedures there and done correctly, then we can say that something was not effective, and then we can make changes based on that.
Right.
So I don't know why that thing is there. I'm sorry. Keep fighting the good fight with it though. we'll keep trying to find new interventions and new strategies that work for everyone. Anything? Yeah.
Yeah. So you have worked in Fayette County Public Schools. You said.
I supervise student teachers. Yes. So I've been in a lot of schools. Okay. So what is your
impression of how effectively the schools implement behavior strategies and have behavior, any kind of probably not ABA in classrooms, but is it in some around here? Do they have some people who are doing it in schools?
So one of the reasons I wanted to come to the University of Kentucky for my doctorate, so I interviewed at a ton of schools. I got in at Vanderbilt, Florida, Kansas, UNC Chapel Hill, all top schools, all do a lot with autism.
Okay.
I wanted to come to University of Kentucky because I really want to prepare teachers. When I was at the other schools, this will all come back around.
Okay.
When I was at the other schools, I would ask, who teaches your undergrads? Who prepares your teachers? Everyone I was with had no idea. Everyone there did research and they taught upper level research courses. They had no clue who was teaching the teachers. And so I was just like, wait, what? Like, how do you not know who teaches these courses? And at the University of Kentucky, it's so much research has come out of here on instructional strategies for teaching new skills. And the people who were on those studies are the people who are teaching the classes. And to me, it blows my mind the education that the students coming out of UK get. It would be, I think and I've heard multiple people say this at other universities, that the undergrad program at University of Kentucky is equivalent to the master's program at a lot of other schools. And so there are some great classrooms in Fayette County. There are some people doing really good things. That being said, another thing to think about is the amount of resources needed to implement what's in research. We're really trying to bridge that gap from, there was 3 people with this one student in this study, to you have a classroom of a teacher, 2 paraprofessionals who their training may be, who knows, and you've got 8 students, or goodness no, it'd be like 12 students. And so really trying to get that there. And so,
As far as you know, are the people who are performing the functional behavior assessments, they by and large have the latest research results, they know what they're looking at, and they know what to ask for
I would hope
their
that
teachers?
if, I don't know that
Yeah.
answer, I'm not that
Because
involved
because you're not on that level, you're teaching the ones fresh out,
I'm
entering
teaching.
classrooms, not the people who are at central office performing
Yeah, so I'm not working on that
Yeah.
level.
Yeah.
And the other thing, part of the equation that's missing here, because of the way the Fayette County hires its teachers, the people who are graduating with those skills are long gone to other facilities by the time Fayette County gets ready to hire. So even though we're producing great skilled teachers, they're not staying here. They got a job before Fayette County makes up its mind.
Because they'll wait really late.
Yeah.
I've noticed that.
Really?
It's, oh, yes.
I'm very happy with all the placements we have for our student teachers here. That being said, I observe 9 student teachers who are placed with a cooperating teacher. I've probably been in close to 20 classrooms. That's it. So there's so many other classrooms, but I think there are some really great classrooms here. And a lot of the stuff I said about schools and their responsibilities, I am saying it so that ideally FBAs will be, all right, we're going to do an FBA on this to treat this challenging behavior. And it can be overwhelming to have all these acronyms thrown at you and you have no background, you're having to learn it right there in the meeting where they're making decisions. And it can be beneficial to be able to talk about function, say we need to look at the data, things like that, and make sure people don't get ahead and think, oh, well, I had another student who did this, I'm going to do this, this has been effective. Or they don't just do an interview and think, this is pretty clear, I think I know what it is, and go from there, because again, I don't know of any, there was a study done on a very structured interview format, and they found that it was only 64% reliable. Now, if that's all we had, that'd be great, but 64%, 36% of the time that it has the wrong function, that is dangerous for everyone involved. So it's got to be more than just interviews, and hopefully you can take this, when you're in those situations, just make you a better advocate, because you want to keep a good relationship with your teacher, with your student teacher. I was a teacher. I would never worked in administration. When I was a BCBA in the school, I was a teacher. I never worked as a consultant or anything like that. So I am definitely all for the schools being able to doing what they should be doing. But speaking as a teacher, there are times when you just feel overwhelmed and you just need a kick in the butt to either do what you're supposed to be doing, or you need to ask for help from someone else and say, hey, I have got a student and I do not know what I'm doing. I either need additional training on this, or I need someone to come in and help me on that. And that also increase, that can increase the demand and let counties know, okay, we need additional people to do this, or we need additional people to do that. So yeah, I don't want anyone going out and getting litigious out of this. I want it to be that you're using the resources that you have available to their fullest extent possible, because they're great resources.
I think too, there are some.
I'm just wondering why more schools don't use the Kentucky Autism Center, since they have the free training available to all the schools, where they will go in and actually train schools on behavior and different.
I am not familiar with the Kentucky Autism
It's
Center.
at U of L. It's not.
Oh, okay.
I'm just wondering
Training
why
center,
more
Kentucky Autism Training
schools do
Center.
not use that.
Is it
Like,
free?
Yeah, they have,
Okay.
they have to invite them in, they can't just
Yeah,
invite
invite.
themselves.
But they
and-
do send out a letter every year to schools asking,
Well, and
I'm just kind of wondering why more schools do not use that, since it is free, and it would be free training.
yeah, and so yeah, a lot of the issues related to professional development for teachers in terms of, so again, we've identified what are evidence-based practices. All right, teachers, do it. Not that easy. They're not in school learning anything anymore. It is so hard to keep up to date on stuff when you're teaching. And when you have professional developments, they're usually geared towards the entire school. Now, in some ginormous schools, I know in the Metro Atlanta area, they would be able to break it out and have more specific professional developments for teachers who taught similar things. But there's a lot of considerations in terms of, if it's on a weekend, do the teachers get paid? Is there a requirement for them to come? If it's on the weekday, who all goes? Do they pay for subs for everyone? If it's in the summer, who's around? That being said, I'm not saying those are excuses. I'm saying that those might be things that could be interfering with that. But
They'll
yeah.
actually come into their classroom, or with a classroom of kids. I'm just kind of.
Well, if it's that situation, then it's. I wonder if it's a lack of
Awareness.
or maybe the autism. Is the Autism Center just booked right now in terms of their services that they're able to provide?
I don't think so.
Well, I do not know.
I know that they send out letters at the beginning of the school year. That's why I was just wondering about that.
Yeah,
And I had another question. I wanted to know about the sensory, because I sit on the subcommittee at the Kentucky Advisory Autism, and I have this question to a lot of professors at the University of Kentucky in Louisville, because my son has a lot of sensory, and a lot of kids with autism do. And so my question to them all the time is, he couldn't perform well in school if he didn't get sensory. And his sensory has he's been in sensory therapy for 5 years, and it has made a tremendous difference in his life as far as his school, besides his normal life. So the sensory is a huge component for him, even in his schoolwork.
Yeah.
And when I see these studies, it just blows my mind.
So in the original description of autism, there was talk that in the 40s they were saying there's some sensory component to it. In just a very general description, the first 10 kids that they ever saw at Johns Hopkins, they said that there was indication that there being something sensory related with it. Now, as we look at it, we're developing interventions. There is something there in the latest diagnostic DSM, the manual that describes how to diagnose autism. There is a mention of being sensory related now, and I think that, or sorry, not I think. The issue with it is that there has been a lot of research done on it that has been low quality. or there's a lot of issues with the research on it, and it makes it hard to justify the results and make the claims that a lot of people want to make. That being said, there are studies showing its effectiveness for some individuals. Another thing with it, though, is that in comparative studies, when they've used function-based treatments, they've been more effective than sensory-based interventions. Again, though, it's sensory-based interventions. I don't know of any of them that there's any danger to the child, and they can be easier to implement than both in amount of with resources, considering the amount of knowledge needed to do a functional behavior assessment, but also the amount of time put into all that, and then training afterwards on it. It can be a lot easier to go the sensory-based intervention route. It's just that in schools, again, occupational therapy and sensory-based interventions can be great, are effective when we're not. There is a big evidence base for them outside of treating challenging behavior. And so we just have to make that distinction sometimes, and that are we trying to target fine motor writing skills in terms of what muscles do we need to have built up to be able to write these letters? So should they be writing on, should they be writing 1-inch boxes? Should they just be writing letters instead of using their arm or using their wrist? Different kind of questions like that, very beneficial for teachers to work with occupational therapists or physical therapists too in those contexts. But in terms of treating challenging behavior in school systems, it's tough now to say, okay, well, we're going to treat this with sensory integration. And if they want to do that and the parent says, okay, let's do that, if the IEP team's on board with it, which the parent is a part of, it's tough to argue with that. Granted, someone definitely can, and they should feel comfortable doing that. But, data should be collected, and there should be a determination based on the data of, yeah, this did make a difference, no, this didn't make a difference, regardless of whatever intervention is being used. And so, yeah, it's a tough study to digest when there are for so many people it was effective. But again, it's got to go with what's most effective, most efficient.
Can I piggyback on that?
Yeah, please.
Because it's the same thing. So if our son, who's 4, and has a hard time sitting still or focusing or whatever, they want to use a weighted vest, and they're showing in ABA at occupational therapy that he can attend better with that. Is that something that can be put into his IEP, or now because there is research showing that it's not? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I don't want to train him with this if when he gets to the public school they aren't going to let him use it.
Yeah, you can. You can definitely put. Yeah, you can definitely put that in IEP.
Okay.
And again, if the IEP team wants to, and if everyone's on board with using sensory-based strategies to try and target a challenging behavior, go for it. Make sure you have data to back up its effectiveness. Or if someone's pushing that and you don't want that, say, reference things like, yeah, I don't want that. We need to do a functional behavior assessment on this. I need to figure out, why is this happening?
Okay.
But yeah, you can't put that in IEP.
That makes sense.
You are in control of those IEP meetings. Yeah, those, I do not know enough about behavioral strategies that have been done to treat those. So I cannot say one way or the other whether this could work with that or if it would not work with that. I'm sorry. I do not know. That's a good question, though. Now you got me wanting to look into that.
Have you tried this on behaviors like stimming?
Oh, yeah. So,
How would you go about it?
again, we would have to identify what's the function of that. When we say stimming, a lot of times we're implying that we think it's automatic, in that, the same thing as we would just rock our leg when we're sitting, is that stimming? Is that, I would think that could be considered stimming, but a lot of times we say stimming, we mean that it's occurring throughout the day. It's during times when the student should be focused on instruction.
Yeah, I guess what I see is stress related and excitement related. So,
And so with like things like stress and excitement, we would usually talk about those as being kind of precursors, antecedents to stimming occurring. But then we would just look to see what is stimming accessing. Is it accessing, are they getting attention when they do it? Hey, knock it off, bud, knock it off, chill out. Or something else. Or it could be multiply maintained by attention and automatic. And then teaching an appropriate replacement behavior, or that behavior could be waiting to engage in it, in that you start with just having to do 30 minutes of whatever the activity is, then they can access stimming. And then you just build up, or sorry, not 30 minutes, did I say 30 seconds? So starting at 30 seconds, and then just building up from there to getting to the 20-minute.
when he gets stressed, he'll start doing the stimming, which would cause people to look at, in the work area, cause them to look at him and wonder what's the matter. So we're trying to find a way that he would be able to reduce his stress and continue to work and know that he's doing it, because he actually doesn't know that he's doing it.
Anything I'm saying is not this will work, go out and do it. It's just based on what I'm hearing right now, and so with we're calling something a stressful situation, I'm trying to identify what those specific situations are that are that precede his stress and then the behavior, and then trying to in those situations teach a socially appropriate replacement behavior to either escape the stress that causes the stereotypy, or to increase, or the behavior could be increasing the amount of work done in that stressful situation to access stereotypy. And again, it's easier said than done. It is so much easier said than done. Just if we were to break it down and kind of look at it, that's how I would look at it and try to treat something.
I've also heard of people replacing the type of stems that they do into things that are maybe more acceptable, like maybe instead of flapping arms, like stroking your beard, or there's a nice YouTube video of a Starbucks worker who's autistic, and they turn his stems into little dances.
Yes.
And so you have to go on YouTube and look for a dancing barista. And there's the guy at Starbucks, he's making all the stuff, he's doing all those little moves that to him are stems, but are perceived as dancing, and they actually became quite popular.
But you see, what's important about that is any sensory behavior, and I think one of the reasons why the data show the ineffectiveness of some sensory behaviors is because people are so individual in terms of the nerve stimuli instead of sensory behaviors. It's the same kind of thing we look at when we talk about food and food behaviors and food allergy. Why is it when you eat some foods, it causes you to sweat more, it releases sweat glands, and you're uncomfortable, and you act odd? It's the same kind of things with the sensory behavior. It's so individual to that person and their brain stimuli and how their nerves respond that you can't get a bold, broad area of data that says, oh, in every case, this is what's going to happen. It can't, because all those behaviors are different.
Yeah.
So when you identify functional behavior analysis for your person, and if that sensory response that you chose makes a difference, then fine. You can do it to that person, because if it doesn't work, no reason not to do it. But you can't use it as hard data to say, unless you're doing it for everybody and a whole group, it works. It never works that way. Yeah. It works with your kid or this person. So the dancing barista, that works for him. Yeah. Right. If all the baristas started dancing when I went to the I would just get really annoyed, because that's how my senses were responding.
The point is, you sometimes redirect the stems into something that's more, that's less disruptive or more socially acceptable, or whatever, another approach to try.
And if I can piggyback on that. So that's why a lot of students, that's why we have special education for students who the general education curriculum is not appropriate. meaning both students who are in gifted classes as well as students who need more different types of interventions to acquire different skills. And it's an individualized education plan, and so it's made tailored to them. And yes, we have massive data saying that it's more ineffective than it is effective, but again, there are demonstrations of it being effective. And it would be great if teachers could all be trained to work on that individual level and really get into that. But in 4 years, you come up with an undergraduate degree and you can teach. It's really hard to do that. And so it's what should we be teaching, and it is, we need to be teaching evidence-based practices, because that's going to help the most number of kids. And FBA is lumped into evidence-based practices, so ideally it should help everyone. Again though, there's non-responders, as y'all saw in the video. That was not fun.
I don't really know how to ask this question, but I babysit for my grandkids sometimes, and the oldest one is the one with autism. He's also deaf in one ear, but he has hearing aid. He's going to be 12 in August, and in the last year and a half to 2 years, he's become extremely anxious, very anxious about, seems like a lot of things, but I don't really understand it very well. And he's become very emotional about it. Like, you can't, he doesn't want to get older because he's going to die, because he's learned that. He's learned a bunch of things, but I'm not really sure how to approach him when he's having a, an episode, like when his parents are gone. Like, there are certain things that used to soothe him that don't anymore. But I'm not really sure. His mom is great with him, and he goes to a special school because Fayette County just decided that once his ball broke for his chair, that he didn't need it anymore. And she was like, you mean his sensory stuff is automatically gone and now he's not autistic or anything? So they had so much trouble that their step-grandpa, I guess, put him in a special school. But I really don't know how to deal with them very well.
I'm sorry, but I cannot ethically give you strategies for that. Okay. I do not know the situation.
Okay.
Now, we can't put it in this context and say, what is the challenging behavior we're targeting, and what does it look like? Then, if there was an FBA process, we could say, why is it occurring? What is he getting out of something? Is he getting attention for it? Any one of those things, and teach some type of replacement behavior. Whether it's, hey, I need to take a break from this, I don't want to do this. But then when it says things like aging, can't escape aging.
Yeah.
I need a break from aging. I don't know.
Well, if anybody has any suggestions.
I could use a break from aging.
I know I should, but I can't. It doesn't even happen.
Can I have a question? We can put all of these things together though, right? I mean, because I do several of these things, the sensory, all of the different things together. I think, you know what I'm saying? I think that makes a roundabout.
That's tough for me to be able to.
I'm just saying.
I don't know if we have research to support multi-treatment packages that pull from many different interventions. Because a lot of times with research, if we have that, then that's confounding. We don't know if it was that intervention or that intervention. So a lot of times in research, there are, in large group studies, there are times when kids may be getting other types of therapies that could contribute. But as a whole, we can control there's ways we can control for that, but it's not super common. And I don't know if I can. Okay. That being said, if you're getting multiple types of evidence-based, research-based instruction, then I don't think there's an issue with that. If it's the kind of thing where you're for a lot of my students, their families are like, hey, we've got the funds, we want to try everything we can. It's I can't live myself if I don't kind of situation. I wouldn't. Research doesn't support that.
No, I'm talking about what you're talking about. I'm talking about your behavior. I'm talking about doing that plus sensory, or you can combine two things together is what I'm saying.
It's just a failing
I don't know if
of
I can-
research generally speaking, that it cannot look at a cohort of individuals and say, we're gonna try this number of different types of interventions, and this group we're gonna try this, because it would be an infinite number of interventions, and you wouldn't be able to say which intervention. He's just saying it's not backed up by research.
Now, if the data that the therapist or that you have, that y'all are referencing, if it is reliable data, the procedures are done like they're supposed to be done, and things are effective, I mean,
I guess I'm
That's
just
great.
asking at different times, like you might need, in the child's life, you might need speech at this time, you might need behavior therapy.
Okay.
You might need sensory, I guess I'm not making myself clear.
No, you're doing great. I'm in a different mindset. I appreciate you explaining that. Yeah, so things, yes, all that is appropriate. And so things in the school system, if you're getting speech, OT, PT, any of those related services, there's going to be set goals those are targeting.
Right.
And the goals that are set for those, they should relate to that field to where there's an evidence base to support those procedures from that field teaching that specific thing. Now, communication's a tough one because it spans a lot of different things. And so a lot of times with speech language pathologists, yes, they will work one-on-one with individuals, but they're also doing a lot of teacher training and making sure teachers are doing what they're doing. But now, as we have kind of this, the past 20 years with ABA kind of coming into prominence, it's a lot of it's tough to say who's supposed to be doing what anymore, and that there's so much overlap in procedures and things like that. So PECS, Picture Exchange Communication System, is used with a lot of individuals. That is big in speech language pathology courses developed by two behavior analysts, and so it's just it's tough. But yeah,
That's what I was
you can
kinda
definitely do all that stuff. Every field, it should be whatever's being done. There should be an evidence base to support it in the schools.
Right.
Because they do observation all the time, and so they'll do kind of what you're talking about.
Speech language pathologists should do.
No, I'm saying that the classroom personnel, they do observation all the time. For example, they'll test for certain types of behaviors or academic improvement or lack thereof to determine if a break from education over summer, over Thanksgiving, over Christmas had an impact on that. So they are kind of, like you say, they're looking for evidence.
Yeah.
So I guess they
Should always be
can-
looking for
yeah.
evidence. Taking data.
Yes, they're always
Should
taking
always be
data.
data.
Yeah.
Anything else?
What factors in a lot with whether a child is going to be mainstreamed into the classroom with help, or is going to be basically kept in not a room by themselves, but in a room with other maybe special kids with special needs? What kind of factors determine that?
It would, based on the needs of the child, so you look at, can their needs be met in the general education classroom? Do the practices we have support their learning in the general education classroom? So if there are very severe, challenging behaviors, and we don't have evidence to support that those can be treated in a general education classroom, that may need to be managed first before general education classroom, or at the same time. So it could be some combination of those things. So services are a spectrum. It shouldn't be this option. It shouldn't be option A, option B, option C, option D. It should be to fit the child. A lot of times it is easier to understand if you present it as option A, B, C, D, E versus going the continuum route, but no, it can be a continuum in that, well, what if can he be in this part of the day without any support and be successful? And you look at the factors, and where are they learning? Are these things that he can learn in a large group format and be successful with? Do you need to be in a co-taught classroom where there's a special education teacher there supporting instruction? Does he need more of a resource classroom to where it's more smaller group learning, but he's still learning the same content, or she's still learning the same content.
So that should really be determined on an individual student basis, right?
Yeah.
Seems like so much with education now, 20% of your kids need to do this, and 30% of your kids in the classroom need to be able to do this. I just don't want to get to a situation, well, we already have our 20% of the kids over here, so we're gonna have to put, your child here. So that doesn't really, do you see that factoring in a lot in special education?
In terms of resources in schools, in counties, a lot of times it can feel like, we don't have the staff to support this type of support. Let's try and do one of these others. And I do see that. I'm not sure if that's quite what you're saying, but
Yeah,
I do
that's what I'm
see
saying. But there's 56 schools in Lexington, so I mean,
40,000 students,
yeah.
40,000 plus students.